When Amanda Knox was charged with murder, she became an international tabloid pariah, the case muddied by salacious details of sex parties and love affairs. Headlines proclaimed her guilt despite contradictory evidence. Now, after 4 years in prison, her conviction overturned. She's using her notoriety to spread an important message. Here's my Nightline co-anchor, Juju Chang.
Either I'm a psychopath in sheep's clothing, or I am you.
Her name is Amanda Knox, known for the notorious murder of her British roommate Meredith Kercher, a crime she did not commit. Knox spent 4 years in an Italian prison, wrongly convicted, painted by prosecutors and the global tabloid media as a sexually obsessed killer.
You were called satanic, demonic, a sex-crazed killer. How did it get so distorted?
Well, there was a prosecutor who had tunnel vision, who had this idea that I was guilty, and I was guilty no matter what. He had to just find the way to prove it.
The world watched her sensational trials and tribulations.
The girl known as Foxy Knox.
Fully exonerated only last year by the Italian Supreme Court, she's stepping back into the spotlight, she says, to shed light on how innocent people can be branded guilty.
People were trying to find the answers in my eyes. It was this attempt to project this monster onto me. But really, we need to look at the objective evidence that's available to us, and that has nothing to do with me.
Telling her story in the Netflix documentary, Amanda Knox.
Wrongful convictions happen everywhere. It's not like we're safe from wrongful convictions because we're here in the United States. There are systematic problems that exist that lead to wrongful convictions.
Her ordeal began almost 9 years ago. The fresh-faced exchange student from Seattle, 20 years old and just beginning a year studying abroad in Perugia.
Are you excited to see David? David, the statue of David.
Oh,
God
good
damn.
one.
Knox was love-struck with a new Italian boyfriend of just 8 days, Raffaele Sollecito. But it all came crashing down when Kercher was found sexually assaulted and stabbed to death in the 4-bedroom apartment they shared with 2 other roommates. It was an instantaneous worldwide media feeding frenzy. Knox's every behavior dissected.
The friends were telling us how Amanda had been behaving, performing cartwheels and kissing each other. I mean, who behaves like that?
When the lovebirds were seen smiling and kissing outside the murder scene just hours after the crime, they immediately came under suspicion.
The other sensationalized aspect of your trial was this idea that you didn't act innocent.
Whether or not my boyfriend was comforting me outside of the house where I had just found out my roommate was murdered, it's irrelevant because the evidence of the case proved my innocence.
Knox believes their denials were pushed aside by the prosecutor, Giuliano Manini, in favor of a more salacious story. She and her boyfriend, along with a drifter named Rudy Gaudet, killed Kercher in a sadistic sex game gone awry.
From the very beginning, from the prosecutor saying case closed, we've got it, this perception of me that came out of nowhere, that was created to justify a narrative that included my guilt.
During 53 hours of withering interrogation, Knox claims Italian investigators broke her down.
I was hit on the back of the head. I was yelled at. Police were coming in and out of the room, telling me that I was a liar. It was utter chaos.
She says interrogators made her doubt her own memories.
In that moment, I thought it could have been true.
Ci fosse una continua oscillazione tra la realtà e il sogno.
The police told me that I had amnesia and that I better remember the truth. And so what they were forcing me to consider was that my memories that I had spent the night with Raphael, were wrong, and that I needed to re-scramble my brain around in order to bring out the truth.
Knox insists she conjured up a false memory, confessing to being there and covering her ears to block out Kercher's screams.
That's the popular perception. Why in the world would anyone confess to something they didn't do?
Well, a lot of cases of someone who is wrongfully convicted include a false confession, where someone was put through coercive interrogation techniques that led them to break.
Knox's confession, along with damning DNA evidence found on her boyfriend's kitchen knife, evidence that was later determined to be contaminated, were enough at the time to put the couple on trial for murder. They were found guilty and sentenced to 26 and 25 years in prison, respectively.
When you heard the first guilty verdict in the courtroom, what went through your mind?
I couldn't believe it because I still believed that it was impossible to convict an innocent person.
Italians celebrated their convictions. Rudy Gaudet, who'd had a history of break-ins, left fingerprints and DNA all over the crime scene. He was tried separately and convicted, sentenced to just 16 years in prison.
He may actually get out of prison this year.
Yeah.
You just shuddered.
I don't know what to expect from him.
Knox languished in prison.
My hair was falling out. At a certain point, I developed hives all over my body.
How many sleepless nights did you spend behind bars?
You know, I tried to force myself to sleep because it was difficult to be awake.
Meanwhile, her family never doubted her innocence, mortgaging their home and declaring bankruptcy to pay for her defense.
It's difficult for them to talk about. They don't want me to feel bad, like it's somehow my fault that the suffering that they went through.
And after a thorough review of evidence, almost 2 years after the initial guilty verdict, their convictions were overturned on appeal.
It feels as though all of Perugia is now packing the main street outside the courthouse.
Knox was released and immediately returned to the United States, her arrival playing out on live TV.
Thank you to everyone who's believed in me, who's defended me, who's supported my family.
But Knox's ordeal was not over. In January of 2014, her acquittal was reversed, thanks to determined prosecutor Giuliano Manini.
What were your impressions of him?
I got to see the prosecutor and his kinds of biases and prejudices and ideas and, you know, human qualities like wanting to bring justice to Meredith Kercher. He persisted in error so long that he convinced himself. I don't know. I'm a victim of his persistence in error.
Even as the Italian courts considered forcing her to return to Italy, Knox was defiant.
I will never go willingly back to the place where I'm going to fight this until the very end.
Finally, 7.5 years after Meredith Kercher was killed, the final verdict. A moment captured for the Netflix documentary. The highest court in Italy blaming stunning flaws in the investigation.
The Italian Supreme Court said, no, this is over. Like, she's innocent, done. I'm not being hunted anymore. That means that I can finally be proactive. That means I can finally look towards other people who still need defending. Accusations can, in fact, come out of nowhere.
Knox's new project, Injustice for All, highlighting others who've been wrongly convicted.
There's no way that I can go back to being the person who I was before all of this happened. I'm forever marked, and not just marked by other people, but also marked by my experience. And the important thing moving forward is just acknowledging that, and acknowledging that I'm not the only one. Like, there are plenty of exonerees who are going through worse than I have. And what's important is, you know, I'm going to take ownership of the fact that I'm an exoneree, and I'm going to share the fact that there is a voice to be heard with them.
So this isn't just about clearing your name or reputation.
My name has been cleared, so I'm not concerned about that.
There will always be doubters who say now Amanda Knox is cashing in.
Well, you know, they already say that, and what matters to me is if I can make a difference to someone else.